Good morning, everybody. This is day 11 of Make Your Own Sourdough Starter with me. And today I wanted to show you how the sourdough starter is doing. I tested it yesterday. As a matter of fact, I took some pictures of the test, so let me show you. So yesterday, after we fed in the morning, I put my sourdough starter on the counter, and after the zero is marked where the starter began at, and I didn't have a 2-hour mark because I went shopping and I didn't get back in time, so I had to wait till the 4-hour mark. So at 4 hours I marked it, and if you remember right, the other day when we tested them the first time, the starter only got up to 4 hours and then it peaked and it started falling. So I actually was able to get to 5 hours peak yesterday, which tells me that my sourdough starter is probably ready to go ahead and make bread with. And then at the 6th hour it looked like this. So it fell back to the 4-hour mark when it was 6 hours old. And just to remind you, this is what happened a few days ago when we tested our starter the first time. See if I can show it. There we go. So the first time this is what it looked like. It peaked and then it fell down to the 6-hour mark. So, but it never got to the 5 hours. I mean, it did, but it was falling at that point. So, show you now, if I can get the right one. Okay, sorry about that. I'm new to all this and it's hard to figure it out sometimes. The marking is still there from yesterday when I did the experiment, and I wanted to show you how high the starter still is in the jar. It was fed last night. It's been 12 hours since I fed it, and it's still up at the 4-hour mark. So it's actually doing really well. It has a sour, it has a sour tang to it because it needs to be fed. It's nice and bubbly. It has a wonderful aroma. But like I said, it's a bit on the tangy side. It just sort of hits you in the nostrils, a little bit on the sharp side, and that will tell you that it needs to be fed. So this morning what I'm going to do is I'm going to discard my starter and feed it. And then I'm going to take the discard and I'm also going to feed that, because later this afternoon I'm going to make up some dough, and then tomorrow I'm going to bake it. Tomorrow I won't be live. I have to go somewhere in the morning, but I'm not leaving until after I bake my bread in the morning. So I will put together that video and I will post it before I leave, so that tomorrow morning you will have a video showing you how to make our first test loaf. And if you want to, follow along and make the test loaf, that's great. But if your sourdough starter isn't strong enough and your loaf is a little bit on the flat side, that's okay too, because you can do the test loaf again in a couple days, and even a flat loaf tastes good. So let's go ahead and feed our starter here. Well, I'm going to discard. I'll discard all but 30 grams for our starter. And the reason why I am not just feeding the starter and then using it later this afternoon is because of our video event. I want to keep this starter on schedule for its feeding so we can tell what it's doing each day. Okay, I've got about, maybe I have a little bit more than 30 grams in there. Okay, there we go. I've got a little bit of starter left in there, if you can see it. And I'm going to feed it 60 grams of water. And I will be feeding it 60 grams of flour. This is the all-purpose and whole wheat flour mixture that I've been using all during this event. Just a little bit more. There we go. Stir it up really nice and vigorously. Okay, and if you want to test your starter, go ahead and scrape down the sides so you can see what you're doing. You can see where the starter's at. Then kind of smooth it over and flatten it out so that you can mark the sides and see what's happening. So maybe you can see a little bit better. When I did the test, I took a paper towel and I really wiped down the sides a lot better. So I'll set that aside. Now I'm going to be mixing up dough this afternoon at around 3:30 to 4 p.m. So what I want to do is I want more starter than food. Well, I mean as far as the ratio. So I'm going to put in a higher ratio of food compared to flour and water. So what I want to do is, I need 120 grams for my dough, and so I'm going to do enough and have a little bit left over, almost pretending like this is just a regular starter and not something that I took aside extra. So I'm going to take about 60 grams of starter. Just a little bit more in there. Okay, and I'm going to be feeding it 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. And the reason I'm doing that is because the more starter you have, the faster it will ferment. The less starter that you have, the longer it will take. It will take longer to ferment. And since I want to mix up dough within the next 6 hours, I'm going to use more starter. So let me put in 50 grams of water. Okay. And 50 grams of flour. Okay, so I'm just going to mix that up. There, and I will have plenty for my dough this afternoon and have some left over as well. I don't really need any left over since I have my other sourdough starter. But like I said, I'm just pretending that instead of my test starter, that this is the real starter. So basically you would discard and then feed enough for your formula, and then enough left over to continue feeding. So there's the starter mixed up and ready to go. I'll set it aside at room temperature, and it should be ready by this afternoon. It should be nice and bubbly and vigorous. So like I said, tomorrow I won't be here, and so I won't be doing a live feed tomorrow. I'll answer questions this morning, and I will also try really hard to make sure I have the video of the formula that I'm doing this afternoon. I'll bake it off, and I'll go ahead and edit it and try to have that posted on YouTube. So instead of coming to the live feed tomorrow, go ahead and go to my regular channel, and I hopefully will have the video posted. If I can't actually post it in the morning, then check later tomorrow afternoon. So I wanted to check and see if anybody had any questions. And I hope everyone's sourdough starter is doing really good. Like I said, today for me it's day 11, and the starter peaked yesterday at the 5-hour mark, which shows it's continuing to gain in strength, which is really wonderful. I'm hoping that it will continue to gain in strength for, and reach that 6-hour mark. So I'll be testing it, maybe tomorrow or the day after. But for sure by day 14 it'll be interesting to see where it's at. Okay, so we have a few comments and questions here. Tony, my starter began well, bubbled, spongy, smelly. It has been resembling pudding over the last 2 days. I will be tossing it and starting over. So Tony, it will do that again unless you figure out what's going on. So if you've been using water that you thought was good, it's perhaps you bought bottled water, but maybe the bottled water wasn't filtered as good as they claimed it was. So try switching out your flour or your water or both, because if you use the same flour and water that you did last time and this starter failed, then most likely the next starter will fail as well. You need to find out what's going on, why the microorganisms are not healthy. Let's see. Sarthak, since we are reaching towards the end of the series, why don't you start a new series on baking sourdough breads, each of different grains with a constant water ratio and different types of scores if you are free? I actually thought maybe of doing a few more live feeds for teaching. The hard part about doing a live feed for baking bread is that it takes so long. There's so many hours of waiting. The putting together the dough, is real manageable as far as a live feed. But if you are, wanting to show the whole method, there's just so many hours involved in making up bread, and most of it's waiting time. So, I think I prefer to film it all, edit out the long parts that nobody would be interested in, and put together something that you can view. And I do have a lot of those type of videos on my feed already. So if you want to check my feed, I've got like over 300 videos now. And some of them stretch back for years. Some of them are from other bakers and workshops I attended. So go ahead and see what I already have on my channel. But I plan on doing more in the future here. This has been a lot of fun, and I plan on doing more. Abe says, I've managed to make it to the live chat. Been baking sourdough for a while, but there is always more to learn. In the middle of a recipe, but incorporating ideas you've been discussing over the last. Okay, well, great, Abe. I'm glad that last few days. Thank you, Teresa. I'm glad that you joined us here, and can't wait to see what you bake up with your sourdough starter. You can always post your pictures in Perfect Sourdough on Facebook, and especially if you put hashtag show your starter, or if you tag me and just say this is bread was made as a result of the live event, then I'll be sure to pay attention to it. Mary Beth says, day 15, when can I stop feeding twice a day? I'm going to bake my first loaf tomorrow. I like large bubbles. Shall I add yeast to the recipe? You're talking to the sourdough lady. It's very, very rare that I use commercial yeast. I will every once in a while make a hybrid recipe. And someday I might just decide to, go into checking out more commercial yeasted recipes. But my passion has been sourdough for a very long time now. So for you to spend 2 weeks making a sourdough starter and then add commercial yeast to it just doesn't make any sense. So what I would say to you is, number one, you asked me, when do you stop feeding twice a day? Well, if you're in a bakery situation where you need a vigorous starter every day, then you'll need to continue that. Some real bakeries will even feed 3 times a day to have a lot of vigorous starter on hand. If you're a home baker and you bake maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, after your starter is healthy and stabilized, which happens around, day 12 to 14, you can go ahead and pour out most of it, keep a small amount in the container, feed it quite a bit, and put it in your refrigerator. Then it should last until the next time when you're ready to feed. You would take it out the day before. You would feed it after you take it out. Then, like perhaps you take it out in the afternoon. You'd feed it in the evening. You'd feed it the next morning. And then you would mix in the afternoon. Or you might want to take it out at night and feed it that night, feed it the next morning, feed it the next afternoon. You'd need to feed it a few times until it's vigorous and bubbly again before you actually mix dough with it. If you have not fed your starter at least once a week, if you're keeping it in the refrigerator, then you may need 2 days to bring it back to being vigorous again. But if you keep it in the refrigerator and take it out, discard most of it and feed it, a nice amount, then you should only need a day to bring it back to, maybe 1 or 2 feedings to bring it back to being vigorous enough to make bread with. So, let's see. Anyway, no, Mary Beth, don't use commercial yeast. I'm going to be posting the formula. I'll try to post the formula tomorrow when I show the bread video. Try to use the formula. It's going to be our test loaf, and see how you do. If you still are afraid of making sourdough bread using only sourdough, look on Udemy for my course, Sourdough Bread Baking 101. I take you through the steps and I show you everything. You'll be making 2 loaves of bread on that course, and it shows you all the basics. And not only that, in a lot of the videos that we've been doing with this live event, if you go and look underneath the video, I put links for those of you who are watching. You can get into Sourdough Bread Baking 101 on Udemy, which is my online course, which is one of 11 online courses. And the Sourdough 101 is only $9.99. So click on that link and go join and make your first loaves of sourdough bread there if you like. However, we will be baking the test bread tomorrow, and you can look on my channel. I have a lot of other videos that show making sourdough bread. Okay, Mary Beth is at high altitude. I have been asked before about baking at high altitude, and I don't live at high altitude. I don't know the changes that you need to make for high altitude baking. I'm pretty sure that there are groups and websites that will help you with that. So if you're at high altitude, you do need to change some techniques when you're baking bread, but you need to go and do that research. Sheena, thank you from Northern Ireland. Have really enjoyed this series. It's been really nice having you here, Sheena, and you're welcome. I've enjoyed doing this. Rocio, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. My starter is doing great. It doubled in about 9 to 10 hours and holds it there until the next feeding. It does better overnight than during the day. Any reason for that? Temperature is the same all day. I'm not sure what you mean by it does better overnight than during the day. I think if the temperature is the same, the only other thing I could think of that would be different would be the pressure, the pressure that that drops at night. So I'm not sure if anything else would be different. But if your starter doubles in 9 to 10 hours, that means that you can use the real long fermented formulas for sourdough bread. It means, though, that you have to be more careful about the shorter formulas. Your sourdough starter might not be very good if you follow the timing for a one-day bread if it takes your starter 9 to 10 hours to double. So you would have to be aware of that. And that's why it's really good to test your starter. If you have a really long peaking starter of 9 to 10 hours, then you are going to have to change the timing of a formula that is a one-day bread and starts and finishes within 6 to 8 hours. And if you have a really short peaking starter, maybe one that's 4 hours peaking, and it never becomes longer than that, then you're going to have to be careful about the long fermented starters. If you want to make a I'm sorry, the long fermented formulas. If you want to follow a long fermented formula, you're going to have to push the limits of your starter by keeping your starter cooler and your dough cooler. And you're going to have to use less of your starter so that it will last longer in the dough. But no matter what peaking time your starter has, there's things that you can do that will either slow it down or speed it up. So knowing where your starter is as far as peaking time is real essential in helping you to understand why you might be failing at a certain formula. So test your starter and see what it can do. And since it's a new starter, don't assume that if it's 4 hour peaking today that that's what it is. Test it again in another 4 days or another week and just see if it's changed. Okay, Michelle, hello from Belgium. I have white spelt flour. Do I have to mix it with another flour to bake with, or is spelt flour strong enough on its own? Spelt flour has, as far as I remember, spelt flour has a lot more gliadin for the gluten protein. Gliadin is the gluten protein that is what relaxes the dough and helps it to spread. Glutenine is the one that tightens the dough, and so you need a certain balance between the two of them to have a dough that will stretch up and spread out. If your dough is too tight, it will try to spring, but it won't be able to. The crumb will be a bit more dense. You won't have the oven spring that you want. If you have too much gliadin, or you've broken down your gluten too much, like with too long of an autolyse, then you're going to have a loaf that will spread. It won't be as high, and it'll be flatter, and it will be a little more difficult to handle. So you need a balance between the two, where the dough not only springs up and and is able to stretch, but will hold the shape. And so you need both of those proteins in a good balance. So some people will use spelt with another flour that's stronger. However, I've seen all spelt loaves that look wonderful. So keep in mind, the characteristics of spelt and work with it. Work with the characteristics. Okay. Sherry says, mine is peaking at 6 hours yesterday. Sounds good. Sherry, your starter sounds like it's ready to make the first test loaf. So see if you can follow along with me tomorrow when I post the formula and show how to make the first test loaf. And we'll see how your loaf comes out. It's so exciting. And Sakartha says, good luck for tomorrow. Yeah, well, we'll do the first test loaf and see how it comes out. And if it doesn't come out as good as I hope, that's okay. It's a test loaf. I'm hoping it will have a nice oven spring and do really well. But I'm also pushing the limit. It's today's day 11. Tomorrow will be day 12, and my sourdough starter might take a little longer. Typically, the starters that I've made are ready by day 10 or 11 to make bread with. So I'm hopeful that it will make a good loaf of bread. But if I come out with a flattish loaf, that's okay. I can just start again, and so can you. So that'll be all for today, and I won't be doing a live stream tomorrow. I will be doing a live stream the day after, and I'll go ahead and bake the bread and post the video, and we'll see how it comes out, and we can talk about it next time we're together. So we'll see you later. Bye-bye.